What kind of people are we?
Attention crew, this is your Captain Caliban speaking. This is a supplemental episode of Enterprising Individuals, where we bring you news and tidbits from the world of Trek, also interviews with special guests, and a few little surprises along the way. It's been kind of quiet on the Trek news front this week, but it's the good kind of quiet, the kind of quiet that means that everybody is head down, hard at work, and all the new Trek shows that are in development. So no news this week. What I have for you instead is much better. I spoke with Stuart and Thad of the Delta Flyer podcast last week about the TNG episode Justice, which in addition to its exploration of capital punishment, praxis of the Prime Directive, and creative uses of double-sided tape, it's also an examination of Utopia and the unknown unknowns lurking in a postulate no place. Mankind has speculated about the possibility of a perfect society ever since the first caveman just left his trash bags right outside the door of his cave. I mean, who does that? Plato posited a utopian society in his Republic that organized citizens into gold, silver, and bronze tiers, which, first of all, nice rigid class structure there, guy, but also D&D currency denominations are not an encouraging organizational structure for your society. The top 1/10 of 1% of platinum people are now worth just as much as the bottom 90% of electrum people. Utopian fiction really picked up steam in the late 19th century as industry did the same. Do you see what I did there? The world was becoming completely different. Cities were growing, the social order was shuffling like a deck of cards, and every dude who took Econ 101 at his prep school was jamming paper-thin characters into his term paper and calling it a novel of the future. Many of these future visions of utopia were wildly implausible, shallowly conceived, or had major socio-political axes to grind, but they didn't let up, and unsurprisingly, dystopian fiction also came into prominence around this time, as there were plenty of people who were more wary than optimistic about the changes taking place in Western society. Utopia and dystopia are often two sides of the exact same coin in fiction. Change is good for some and bad for others. After all, one man's new life of opportunity and adventure in the off-world colonies is another man's waterlogged crapsack apartment in the Bradbury Building. Star Trek's answer to the utopia question is post-scarcity humanist socialism. Piece of cake, right? Maybe not. Free hot fudge sundaes and never-ending holodeck sunsets are a great sales pitch, but we are a little fuzzy on the rest of the details, despite the fact that every iteration of the Trek franchise continually renews its commitment to those utopian ideals. The fans sure like it when Trek explores the seedier side of its supposed humanist paradise through militaristic exploits, like in the episode Yesterday's Enterprise, technological body horror like any Borg episode, or the skullduggery and deception on display in episodes like In the Pale Moonlight. So which is it? Space hippies or happy jackboots? Blowing on a flute or blowing away the enemies of the Empire? Are we magnanimous or mendacious? What's the real appeal of Trek? Those are the simple, basic questions I put to Lyta Gold, writer, Trek fan, amusements editor, and contributor to Current Affairs, a bi-monthly magazine that analyzes politics and the arts. Lyta wrote an article last year that made the rounds called The Dismal Frontier, in which she brands the first season of Star Trek Discovery as bleak, dystopic, and traitorous to the spirit of the franchise. And she did it all without mentioning the Klingon redesign even once. Take notes, trolls. Lyta and I talked about what's at the soul of Trek's depiction of utopia, the recent glut of dystopic fiction, the S word, that's socialism in science fiction, how Trek has tried to challenge its own utopian ideals, and how Discovery can get and has gotten better in its second season. All that coming up right now, plus stick around after for links to more of Lyta's work and what's coming up next on our show. And with that, let's get underway. Joining me on the show today is Lyta Gold. She is a writer and Trek fan and the amusements editor for Current Affairs magazine at currentaffairs.org. Lyta, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's happy to be here.
Good to have you. Whenever I have a new guest on the show, I always ask them how they first became a Star Trek fan. Do you remember when you first discovered Star Trek?
Yes, I started watching Deep Space Nine and Voyager when they were first aired, and I'd watch them back to back. And I was totally in. I was
Okay.
especially like really it was like Deep Space Nine I was totally in on, and then like Voyager was like as good as I could get to. And then I didn't watch it again for many years, and then have friends who are really into Next Gen, and they got me into Next Gen, and I've never loved it as much,
Okay.
but I like it, and I went back and I watched just about all the original series, not quite all yet, because it's kind of a slog. Let's be real.
Yeah, it can be. It's a different, absolutely different style of storytelling.
Yeah.
But I find, I don't know if it's just I'm the Me TV generation, but I find it somewhat comforting sometimes.
You know, it's got some of that like old world sci-fi charm, that like sort of like golden age. Like it has a lot of references to the Bible and to Shakespeare, and
Yes.
it's kind of charming in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a bit tedious though.
Now, when you started with DS9 then, and then went on to Voyager, did you find yourself feeling lost because you hadn't seen TNG or the original series extensively?
Not at all. And it's a funny thing because people ask me all the time, like, I've never watched Star Trek. Where do I start? And I often just tell people to start with Deep Space Nine, because I think you don't really you kind of get it in the world building.
Yeah.
Like it's lovely to, and when I watched Next Gen later, to like have details filled in about like Worf's life, especially. I remember being just like wowed by all I didn't know about Worf.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, 'cause
he's
there's
just
a
a guy
ton-
that just shows up in the fourth season for
Oh
you.
yeah. And
Right.
you totally miss all of this. This is back and forth with the Empire and being kicked out and brought back in, and what's going on.
Yeah.
Great world building like that. You can kind of jump in anywhere, and there's more to be filled out. But you have such a good sense of the world that you kind of don't need. You know, you can come in at any point.
You wrote an article for Current Affairs in May of last year titled The Dismal Frontier, where you took issue with the tone of the first season of Star Trek Discovery. Specifically that it didn't seem very fun, and that it didn't resemble any other series set in the Star Trek universe. And one of your points is that Trek's vision of Utopia, that is a humanity that it's got its problems mainly worked out, that has been key to the franchise's appeal. Why do you think that is?
So there really are not many stories like Star Trek. I mean, outside of Ursula Le Guin's Ecumen novels, there's very little, especially in popular culture, in the way of utopia. That's not a common theme. Utopias are really hard to write. I'm really obsessed with utopias. I'm reading a lot of them. They're often really boring because they're tough. It's tough to write a story that is exciting when characters fundamentally get along and are trying to solve problems.
Yeah.
And it's much easier to have big drama and blood and space explosions and things like that. Mm-hmm. So I think it's, and at a certain point, there's what makes a particular sci-fi story what it is. I mean, you can look superficially at Star Wars and Star Trek and be like, well, they've both got spaceships and aliens. Right. But they're very, very different. And you couldn't just take one story set in one and put it in the other universe. It wouldn't really work because they have different themes and ideas, and they are based on different things. And it's not just aesthetics and nouns. It's, they really are different stories.
Yeah.
So to try to do a Star Trek story that isn't a utopia, a weird choice. And I'm not convinced it worked.
There are movies and there are particular episodes I can think of that veer off of that idea of dystopia. I mean, it's in the background. It supports, the entire premise. But like Star Trek Nemesis is just such a depressing, dark film. And a lot of it takes place on or near Romulus, which is a world that is not doing very well. Is something of a dystopia. So, yeah, I don't know. I think that I agree that it's important to Trek storytelling. What I guess I want to know is like how you think that Discovery is really is not living up to that. And before you answer, I wanted to address the stark division that seems to exist in Trek fandom over Discovery in general. There are people that love it. There are people that hate it. There's people who love the sort of war aspect. There are people that don't. People can be really nice about it. They can be really mean about it. And I'm trying to remember if this happened with Deep Space Nine, with Voyager, with all these other series, but it just seems such a stark division between fans that should be getting along because they like utopian fiction.
People on the internet are being mean over something petty?
I don't have any proof of this, but it's what I've heard.
So wild.
Yeah.
It's the first time. So I wrote my review about the first season. I'm watching the second season.
Oh, yeah.
And I really like it.
Okay.
I know that's like a shocking departure because
we did it.
We did it.
We got her.
My review is very scathing. But I actually think that they answered a lot of things that were really bothering me, and they answered them in ways that I found very satisfying. I think when Pike shows up at the end of he shows up in the first episode, but at the end of the first episode, he says, "And we're going to have some fun along the way." And I think I think that's really great. He's signaling I took that as signaling to the audience, like, this isn't going to be like the last season. Because, I love Deep Space Nine. It's my favorite one. And Deep Space Nine can get dark. It has some very, some very distressing episodes. You see the darker side of the Federation. It's where they introduce Section 31, which plays such a role in Discovery. But at the same time, the characters themselves, they live in a utopia. The Federation is a utopian society, and they are based on what appear to be socialist principles. And Manu Sadia goes into that in his book about it, because it's always kind of in the background, the economics of it.
Yeah.
They are not our humans. They're not like the normal humans that we're used to. They treat each other very nicely. And, they are generally friendly with each other. They can be sassy. That's one thing I really like about Deep Space Nine, is the characters sass each other a lot. His friends sass each other. Yeah. It's not quite as treacly as TNG. No offense. But, yeah, this is a different world. This is a world where there's no scarcity. There's plenty of abundance. There's full equality. There's no racism. There's no sexism. People can really rise, if they have the talent. And people can do sort of whatever they want. So these are different kind of people. And the first season of Discovery is, it's brutal. People are terribly brutal to each other.
Yeah.
And I don't buy it.
Well, that's honest and fair, I think. And I think that maybe if they had flipped them, if it had come in and it had been, let's have some fun. And then, oh boy, we did something bad, or, Burnham makes a big mistake, and then we have like a war season. But when it comes right out of the gate like that, you think that's exactly what it's going to be. Your comments about humanity being like, I've always thought of them as aliens, kind of like they're us, but they're not us. And they've put all their prejudices behind them, but they're also really self-conscious about it. Like which could be good or bad. Like they're always like talking about how accepting and open they are, but sometimes maybe they buy their own publicity like a little too much, and they overlook certain prejudices that they might have. And as far as like their utopia goes, I mean, it's going pretty great. Like you said, it's post-scarcity. They have a lot of things figured out, but war is still a thing. You've got the encroaching. At some point, we have to have a talk in this, utopia about like the rights of AI. Because that's becoming a thing. I think a lot of first contacts still regularly seem to fail with aliens. And almost every godlike alien that we meet is really unimpressed with us. And maybe that's just a feature, not a bug, of being a omnipotent being. But they're all just like, you think you're pretty great, but you're not that great.
I love all those tropes of it. I think they're fantastic. All the real drama of being a person is sort of pushed off onto the aliens. Right, because the Klingons represent a more aggressive side, and Vulcans represent a more logical side, and the humans are almost lovable stand-ins for like the real drama is happening all around them. Yeah, but I think that has to remain centered, and even it's funny because you're talking about a war plotline. Deep Space Nine has its war plotline, but only at the very end of season 5 does it actually start happening. It's a long, slow build-up. Right. And it kind of justifies all the darkness. But even in then, there's still fun. There's still characters having a good time with each other, being funny, randomly doing a silly baseball episode for no reason. I was actually talking recently to a friend of mine whose uncle has some developmental disabilities, but like loves Trek and is like very, he knows everything. He's like super obsessive about it. And he also hated the first season of Discovery. Oh, yeah. And his comment on it was it had no light, which I thought was just like the perfect encapsulation and like better than my essay, honestly. It didn't have any light. Nobody has any fun. Still in the second season, nobody has any real fun. Nobody ever like has a beer. I'm waiting for I just want Burnham to like have a beer. Like, sit down. She never gets to sit down.
Yeah. There was one, and I've just come to accept that the portrayal of Burnham, I don't really know a lot about Sonequa Martin Green. I mean, she's certainly a powerful actress, but I wonder if every role that she does is this sort of earnest and clenched.
Yeah.
And it kind of bugs me, but I've kind of just accepted it as like, because now that she's less of, you know, the main only protagonist, like we have a crew now, I've just accepted it as like, okay, well, that's how she is. That's fine. But when you have to follow her around all the time, I find myself gripping, you know, the arm of the couch and kind of grinding my teeth a little bit. Yeah.
Just take a spa day. I'm sure they've got a spa.
Yeah, and she had one great scene this season where Tilly is trying to figure out this May thing, and she's kind of losing it, and she goes to Burnham, and Burnham's like totally cool, and totally like talks her down, and like, hey, we're gonna work this out, no problem. And I was like, wow, this is like the most relaxed I've ever seen Michael Burnham. Yeah.
Yeah, she's almost better when she's solving other people's problems than when she's.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, they're not throwing quite as much on her as last season. That was another one of my objections. Is as much as I like Burnham as a character, this idea, like, one, having her as a protagonist without having her be captain is, I think, a little bullshit for your first black woman character. Don't like it.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, like, if you're gonna have your first black woman character as your protagonist, you know, let her be the captain or not. You know, it's kind of it's a weird choice. But she's so centered in the story in the first season. She's kind of the only one who can do anything. Everything sort of happens around her.
Yeah. And
she's sort of a hero in a way that none of the shows really like that. The captain might be the main character, but everybody else like really gets their moments, and you really get to know them intimately from their own point of view, and they all get a chance to shine and do something stupid, and you really get to experience them, because it's part of like the socialism is also in the storytelling.
Yes.
Because this is not the story of the lone hero who can do everything and who's forced to do everything. And it was like brutal watching Burnham have to do everything last season.
Yeah. I don't know if that is just, it was so important to them to tell this story about this one person, or if it's just losing sight of what you pegged as the socialism of the storytelling. And I think it's probably the second one. Like, I really enjoy Discovery. I think there are some really great sequences. But generally, it's like okay TV writing a lot of the time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like, I hate the fact that every single episode has to open with like this unnecessary purple voiceover, you know, like sometimes in life we have to blah, blah. It's just start the show.
Terrible.
I know, just start it. We don't need that.
My God. They're really bad.
Yeah, but 5-6 years ago, I guess that's what they were teaching everybody in film school to do. So they do that every time. I wanted to go back really quick to something that you mentioned about how God and Shakespeare were the two big pillars of the original series. And that extended into TNG. There's a lot of like godlike aliens that they meet. We just did an episode we talked about justice, and in that episode there is an alien race that is being caretooked by a caretaker godlike being, and they just call him God. And I wonder if like we could clearly, like, there's a whole, you know, Judeo-Christian, atomic baby boomer sort of thing going on with that. Do you think that kind of story is dead, like, or should be dead in the 21st century? Gene Roddenberry and all these old men like sticking these God figures in for us to have to connect with or get approval from or something?
You know, honestly, before the second season of Discovery, I would have said so. But I like this Red Angel storyline. I think it's, you know, they finally have the special effects to pull it off. I think it's the big, because, you know, Q is just an actor.
Yeah.
Who snaps his fingers. The prophets are, you know, there's some lighting going on, but they're just actors. It's hard to really convey this sense of ineffable mystery. And the ones in original series especially, it's just a guy in a toga usually. They're always very Greek looking. I mean, it's cute, but yeah, but no, the Red Angel's creepy and disturbing and looks really alien. And I'm finally buying that that there is this ineffable being. I think it's good to put humans in their place. I think it's good for us to look at the galaxy and not think that we're hot shit.
Right.
We could do with a lot more of that.
And it's cool, like you said, that it can look weird and truly alien instead of, oh, it's Abraham Lincoln. Beam him aboard.
Yeah.
One of your comments in your article was especially stinging to me, that you said that Discovery was a hellishly depressing portrayal of diversity where equal representation means a roughly equal chance of being brutally murdered in space. Which I think is true, definitely of the first season. And there's this thing in Trek fandom or enjoyment of Trek where people seem to really like They like the values of Trek, but they also like the episodes where we're shooting things up. Where the Borg are coming, we're blowing things up. Yesterday's Enterprise, we're at war, the war season of DS9. And I think it's kind of like a replicate your cake and eat it too sort of situation because, the message is usually like that war is bad, but you still get the pew pew in there. I think of it as the sort of Star Warsing of Trek, trying to add all this sort of action that's not really related to any kind of theme into it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is kind of the contradiction of Utopia. And like with writing utopian storylines, you still have to make it interesting and you're supposed to make it exciting. And the next gen writers would tear their hair out over Roddenberry's insistence that everybody had to get along.
Yeah, right.
And I can see why. And so I think, and again, because Deep Space Nine is the one I return to as my favorite and the one I first saw. So it was sort of the one that set up what I personally feel Star Trek should be like, though I don't think that that's true for everyone, that everybody has to agree with me on that. That, you buttress these dramatic storylines by having quieter, softer moments. It's actually something that I think is really missing. As much as I'm liking this season of Discovery much better, it's too much going on. These storylines are too tensely braided together.
Yes.
I think in episode 5, Burnham has she runs through all these different emotional things so quickly. Like she's just seen Saru almost die.
Right.
Tilly's her best friend is missing, possibly dead. She runs into Giorgio and then into Ash 5 minutes later.
Yeah.
And she doesn't have any emotional time to really process what's happening, so she sort of shrugs it off.
Yeah.
And it's something that's actually, it's funny because it's a little mini trend I'm starting to notice in prestige TV in the way that it's plotted. That there's often just a ton happening at once, and the characters' emotional arcs are sort of disconnected from the plot arcs because they don't really have time to process what's happening to them because you're always running to the next thing.
Sure. There's no problem with having Burnham's big day where all this stuff happens, but the script doesn't, and the scenes don't show her reacting, interfacing with it like that. Like, geez, she's just kind of showing up in each scene. Yeah.
Right. And this is a person who struggles with her emotions, so this would be really interesting to see.
That's where you should do it.
Yeah, but it's not. But they're just we're rushing to the next point. We're rushing to everything has to be too exciting.
Yeah.
Even the beginning of the most recent episode 6, which I actually really liked this episode a ton. But there's a scene, the scene right at the beginning where Burnham and Pike and Ash are all talking, and the camera. They're just talking about what's going on, but the camera is whooshing around them very dizzyingly. Yeah. Over, and it doesn't add anything. It makes things feel dramatic, more dramatic than what they're talking about. But I think the showrunners are scared that we're going to lose interest. And I appreciate that there's a lot of competition for very exciting television, but I think it's okay to, chill out, slow down. These are chill people. We're all trying to have a little fun.
If you are making Star Trek and you're worried about that, I mean, this is a series that a guy plays a flute. And it's riveting. So I mean, I think they can have a little bit of faith in the audience. It seems like dystopian fiction is on the rise recently, and I don't want to make any amateur predictions about it being a reflection about turmoil in society. Although I think that seems to follow. I don't know if you've heard the theory about vampire movies and zombie movies.
Oh, is it about rich people and poor people? Is that the twin fears?
Yes, sort of. From what I understand, and I might have this backwards, so you can look it up online, but when Democrats are in power, I believe vampire movies are popular. So we get the Clinton year, the Obama years, of course, Twilight.
Yeah.
And then when Republicans are in power, zombie movies are popular. And the idea is that it's a reaction to the administration. Vampires are bloodsuckers, right? They tend to be effete, or this is all stereotypes, of course.
Right.
They tend to be foreign. And then, of course, zombies are mindless and consume and are in hordes and the whole Dawn of the Dead type thing.
That is a really interesting theory. Yeah. All of the various Star Trek iterations really, they have a lot to do with the time period that they're made in.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of interesting to go back. The Borg, as fascinating and as interesting as the Borg are, the Borg represent a fear of the Soviet Union, and not entirely that, but that's at least part of informing what the metaphor is, that it's the collective mind versus these individual minds. Yeah, and then I think the darkness of Deep Space Nine is sort of, and then faced with the Dominion, and the Dominion is in some ways representative of arguably the American Empire, but like the darker version, because they're going around conquering people, and they use soft power and treachery to do it as often as hard power.
Yes.
And they install former military generals as leaders, which is super a thing that we've done.
Yes.
So one of the things that I find really interesting about Discovery, especially the first season, and a little bit in this season, is that it's responding to the time that it's in, but not always in a way that's critical. Sometimes it's taking on some of the characteristics of the neoliberal age without really even noticing. And I really wanted to talk about the end of episode 5.
Sure. Because
there is this weird scene that I don't understand. Between Pike and Leland and Admiral Bad Choices. What's her name?
Admiral Cornwall.
Bad Choices. Yeah. Admiral Lorca. It was not. Right. It's not slut shaming here. That was just a bad choice, and I'm not over it.
Well, it's unprofessional.
It was very unprofessional.
Yeah.
Seriously, with your subordinates. Rules.
Right. Who you've come to yell at, by the way.
Yes.
All right, I'm done yelling at you. Take your pants off. Yeah, it's weird.
Yeah, it was kinky. Well, and so here she comes in to yell at Pike and Leland, and they've just gotten over having this well, they haven't even really had the argument, but they're upset with each other because they both kind of feel betrayed in different ways, and they're old friends.
Right.
And she tells them that they have to work along, and they kind of side-eye each other, and then she says they have to cut the manlier than thou bullshit.
Right.
And that is the weirdest thing because, one, they're not behaving in a very toxically masculine way at all. They've like legit beef with each other and they're not being aggressive. They just side-eyed. And this is also like our post-misogyny future. There is no manlier than thou bullshit. It almost never comes up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually challenged like friends of mine who are like even more into Star Trek than I am to like think of an example. And only one person could think of an example in a TNG episode where Geordi grows a beard, and he gets defensive about his beard. And there's like it's Bev. She's doing poker with them, and and Riker says, "My beard is not an affectation." They'll get really defensive. That's like the only moment of
and then she kind of like shames them, like, "Okay, boys, put them away, yeah,
exactly." And that's like the only moment. It's like if there's toxic masculinity in Star Trek, it's very, very small. And so it was this weird sudden signaling that she's telling them that they need to get along for feminism, basically.
Right.
And then because this is a kind of one of the things that like the neoliberal structure has really glommed onto itself is sort of this fake wokeness where like it's feminist to have like a female head of the CIA, that kind of thing. Like
or every judge you see in like a cop show is like a woman.
Yeah, and that's feminism because she's locking away the bad guys, and there's no interrogation of who are the bad guys and what's happening.
Yeah,
and then that's in this
interesting.
And then this scene really immediately right after, Admiral Bad Choices goes on to lecture Pike. Section 31 may not be the shining beacon of righteous conduct you want it to be, and then she says, "Nation building is never pretty. That is the unappetizing truth, and you know it." And I don't know what nation she's talking about. Do you know what she's talking about in this scene? It doesn't make any sense to me.
I don't. They have just sort of solved the riddle of the sphere at this point, right?
Yeah.
And then they also have gotten Tilly out of the mycelial network.
Yep.
So as far as nation building, is it in reference to the Klingons? Were they talking about the Klingons at all in that scene? Not
in that scene. They haven't come up in this episode at all. This is only in the context of you need to work together to look for Spock to solve the signals issue.
Right.
But why does she say nation building is never pretty? What is she talking about?
Idea. That's very confusing. I don't know. Maybe that's a line or a piece that was from some other script, or there was some element that was cut. That's strange.
It's super weird, and that was my first thought too, is that it got cut. But I think it's also just like it's on right before this scene came on. There was an ad for NCIS, And there was like some like dumb bullshit about like a suspect being like, I'm not going to talk to you, and you guys are like stormtroopers, and the cop was like, oh, I wish I could wear stormtrooper armor. So it like I was like, is this a scene from NCIS? Like, what show am I watching? And it was kind of like the neoliberal consensus like breaking through into Star Trek and like running into the room like, we need to, nation building is never pretty, but we have to work together with these clandestine intelligence organizations, and that's just how it is, and it's for feminism, so you can't complain. And it's great because it made no sense in the context of anything that was happening. And no story editor caught it. And I'm like really interested in everything that went into that moment.
you got your neoliberalism in my Star Trek.
Yeah, it was weird, and this has been such a better season, and people have been sweeties. They've been getting along. They've been kind to each other. They've been trying to solve problems and be helpful, and not just shoot them up all the time.
Well, I'll have to go back through and see what the heck was going on there, because I remember that line, but I remember just kind of swallowing it at the time and just moving forward. Where do you think then, to just take a completely different tack here, where do you think then this fits on the theoretical continuum of, call it Star Trek wokeness then? Because you rightly pointed out that there is, especially in TNG, there is no like toxic masculinity or like masculine displays there. Riker is totally happy to wear an earring and perfume if that's what they do on a planet. So do you think that is in the 24th century they've reached that? Maybe at the time of Kirk and the Space 60s, it's a little more chauvinistic. Take it back to Captain Quantum Leap. It could be, a free-for-all. It could, who knows? Like, do you think that humanity has continued to evolve then to a certain point that we see at the last sort of chronological time in the TNG era?
So this is one of the strange world building issues with Discovery, and because it in so many ways it feels like it's set after, because of the technology, and it's it's only very loosely connected to that timeline, only really through like Pike and Spock. Because as far as we've seen, because the '60s original series was quite misogynist, and that's sort of a reflection of its time, and this is set 10 years before. So if it were misogynist, okay, you could say that that's within the context, but we don't see any misogyny, and this is actually they finally introduced gay characters.
Right.
So, which is a failing of the other series, is that they never really played around with gender and sexuality in that way. They just had equality, but you never saw gay characters or people really acting outside gender norms.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the problem is the show hasn't established that. Like, it would make sense. It could be a thing that could happen, that there's still misogyny, and it would be interesting to see like how like the last traces of misogyny and like racism got eradicated. But they haven't done that. Everybody's cool. Everybody gets along. The men are all real sweeties.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
They want to go to your poetry reading, and well, I mean, the practical answer is that they were made, in successive real world time periods. But I'm just wondering if somebody wanted to, they could sort of make a continuum. Maybe the universe or the Federation becomes more woke and then regresses a little bit. Yeah. Or like that episode with Worf on Ryza, where they've got that faction that wants to.
I love that episode.
Put your clothes on, everybody. Yeah. Yeah. Maybe they take over for a while and things go sort of backwards. And
people hate on that episode, and I mean, it's not a good one, but it's really one of the funniest episodes of Deep Space Nine, I think, because it's just Worf having a bad time on Sex Planet, and just like
that was the pitch too. They're in the room, guys. Worf has a bad time on Sex Planet.
I quote his final line like all the time, which is, "I am on vacation."
There was a line that I really loved from the episode most recently in Discovery, where Saru is talking to Sorana and she's fed up with him, and she's like, "This is a longer conversation," and that's basically code for like, "Okay, you're done. We're going to talk about this later, though." Yes. So I'm adapting that into my vocabulary.
I like that. It's very usable.
I kind of went down a wiki wormhole getting ready for this show, and I learned a lot about utopian fiction. And I guess I always knew that there were a lot of utopian novels written at the end of the 19th century, but I never realized what a response that they were to the Industrial Revolution and all the societal upheavals that resulted from it, and how they inspired a lot of conversation and political theory.
Yeah, I've been reading a ton of feminist utopian novels from that period.
Okay.
And it's really interesting because they imagine the reorganization of society. They often imagine them without men, or entirely. They just get rid of them, or the men are very changed. But yeah, it was certainly a time of everything was changing so rapidly that there was an idea that things could change for the worse, but they could also dramatically change for the better in the future. And you could construct a society. And one of the reasons these novels are so boring is they often go through, like, this is what the schools are like, this is what the government is like. And it's not amazing storytelling, but people are trying to construct a new world that would be a fairer one and a more equitable one and a more fun one.
Yeah, it's like at the end of, it's 1875, and every two-bit would-be political theorist is like, I can write. I'll just take my thesis or my manifesto and then just give it some characters, and now it's a book. Yeah,
yeah, and it's like,
but it's basically just like, welcome to the Utopia. It's the year 8009. Let me explain how our schools work. Yeah, it's not exactly riveting drama.
It's not. It's in the 70s. There's actually an explosion of really great feminist utopian novels again. There's Ursula Le Guin wrote The Dispossessed, of course, which one's not as explicitly feminist as some others. But there's Joanna Russ wrote The Female Man. Marge Piercy wrote Woman on the Edge of Time, which is just wonderful. So it's interesting that when utopian fiction rises up, and there hasn't been a ton lately. I hear Kim Stanley Robinson is pretty utopian, but I can't get into his novels. Unfortunately, I keep trying. But yeah, there hasn't been. I read like one or two things recently that were more utopian, so I'm starting to get excited that maybe they're on their way back, because I think it's a really interesting and really difficult genre in a way that dystopian fiction is much easier. And there's been an explosion in that because it's much easier to imagine things are going to be worse. But to imagine what things are going to be like if things are better, and people are kind to each other, and then to maintain the drama within that, it's a more interesting challenge, I think.
I've also noticed that dystopias, I mean, we've got a lot of them, but I think that like out and out dystopias are also on the decline. Like we've got so many dystopias, they can't all be crapsacky. So I think of like, say, Blade Runner as the classic dystopia. It's dark, it's rainy, there's giant billboards with geishas eating sushi for some reason. But a lot of cinematic utopias are like much brighter and shinier than they used to be. Like in the recent film Alita: Battle Angel, like the last of humanity lives in this city that's a scrapyard basically, but it's always 3:45 p.m. on a sunny day and everybody's wearing Gap fashion.
Well, it doesn't sound so bad, does it?
Yeah, right. You can get fresh fruit, so it's not that bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's reasonable that people are absolutely terrified about their future and are trying to imagine. And it's funny because within the Star Trek universe, the 21st century has this incredibly dark period where there's a Third World War and terrible, terrible things happen. But they arise out of that into the utopia. But yeah, I get why people are feeling dystopia. But Star Trek's not a dystopia. It can play with dystopian elements. Yeah. But I think at its and I think it's funny because I think there is maybe a way that you could make it dystopian if you did like a future one, but you'd have to really show and explain how that happened. Yeah. And I don't think Discovery in its first season really gave us enough. They didn't give us enough world building in the first place to make it clear why everything would have gone to shit just because they had a war with the Klingons.
Because we don't ever really see explicitly what's going on in the Federation.
Yeah.
We don't see the effect on the people, really. There's a lot of telling and not showing about how bad things are. Yeah. There seems to be a fear of the future in Star Trek storytelling. There's this push to... Every time they do something new, it seems like it's a prequel, or a reboot. And I don't think that's really germane to the exploratory bent of the franchise. I've heard it remarked that, and I think you said it yourself, that this could have been a sequel series instead of a prequel series. And I wonder why they are afraid to move forward. And I wonder if it has anything to do with something else that I was thinking, which was, as we get farther and farther into the life of this franchise, we're more than 50 years in now, how much more does it seem like an alternate universe than just our future? Like you already mentioned, we're already past the point where we were supposed to be taken over by genetically engineered supermen, and we're only a couple years away from whenever World War III is supposed to happen. And so if Trek does go another 50 years, will they have to just soft reboot, or you know what I mean? Like, will it still represent our aspirations represent us in the future, or will it just be like an alternate universe?
Yeah, it's funny. I hadn't thought of that. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, they can. It's something that like Marvel and DC have done. They sort of like, soft sliding the time scale when they have to.
Yeah. Like Tony Stark was wounded in Vietnam, before hostilities had begun. Yeah.
Yeah. So they, it's always possible to sort of reset that. I cynically, I think the fear of doing a sequel series is because the real impetus for CBS behind making this show is it's not really to make a show for the fans. It's to make a show that extends the franchise and, sells ad dollars for the, for the commercial breaks. And you can, make associated consumer products and Funko Pops around it. And they're starting a lot of new every day. Like there's another new Star Trek series that's happening that I find out about, which is exciting in some ways. But I'm concerned that it's done. They're just sort of throwing a lot of stuff at the wall, and they want to know what sticks. And it's in the same way that a lot of other companies that have control of pop culture properties are doing. There's at least one or two new movies every year. They want to extend the franchise to for corporate partnerships, for consumer products, for all these other reasons that go into it that are not for storytelling.
Yeah, ironically, it's very capitalist, the production of this socialist show.
Yeah, it really is, and and I think they might be concerned, like, we'll bring in new viewers if it's set in a prequel, but if it's set post Deep Space Nine and Voyager, we'll have to explain all that stuff, and that's too much. But we are getting our Picard show, so
yeah, that's true. Yeah. Or people could just start watching it like you did with DS9 and not worry about it. Yeah. We've talked about Utopia several times before on the show, and I've actually referenced your article in some of those discussions. And the feeling that I come away with after those discussions is that I don't feel like I really know all that much about how the Utopia of the Federation is even supposed to work. Picard says, we don't pursue wealth, we don't put people to death, we value self-improvement and so on and so forth. But I wonder, like, if we could really define the things necessary and the ins and outs of this society, maybe we could try it out. I don't know, like, can we really conceptualize it? I talked to Manu Sadia earlier on the show, and we were talking about the economic side of it and his belief that the kind of society that you see in Trek is just the natural endpoint of eliminating scarcity. Like, there just won't be any. Sure, there'll be upheavals, but there just won't be any. Capitalism can't function if everybody has everything they want. Right. How does it give you more? Yeah. How do you hold things back from people? Yeah.
I love Manu Sadia's book. I think it's wonderful.
Yeah, it's great.
And I notice in it he has to sort of he admits at one point he has to kind of, because the economic stuff is just in the background, and it's just little hints here and there, and he has to really piece it together from the tiny little bit that we're given.
Or I mentioned before how we think of, or I thought of Star Trek characters as aliens in some way, and I think they're really cutting down on that, and I don't know if it's because this is set prior to the original series and TNG, but like I think they're trying to sort of eliminate the distance. It's not the same egalitarian portrayal that nobody's rehearsing Pippin in the hold of Discovery. They're eating burritos, and they're like, "What's up, dude?" And I think it's a conscious choice to make us connect more than you would with, say, Picard and Data, playing Henry V in the holodeck or whatever.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple things there, and I think it's getting away a bit from this sort of like sort of traditional culture of Star Trek being around Shakespeare and it's sort of higher culture of the 20th century, or beyond, before, like the 20th century ideas of like what high culture meant.
Yeah,
and I think people
nobody
are more
wrote a good play.
Yeah,
in 400 years,
okay.
Nobody's written a. Yeah,
this is a thing that bugs me. This is actually like something because something that is bugging me a little bit about the season of Discovery is there's so many 20th century references. Tig Notaro is just 20th century reference every minute, and I'm like, what? 21st century? Like, why? Did nothing else happen ever? And it actually kind of begs the question: is there any kind of popular culture in a post-scarcity world?
Oh.
Which is something I've
got my new show.
About.
You're coming back for that show.
Really?
Oh,
Wonderful.
yes.
I'm excited.
That's great because Because, okay, so definitely things would be popular, but if nothing is, can you, I think I talked to Manu about this, like, can you market something to an audience still? Like, is there a product? Is there something that you push? Or is it all just a hierarchy of talent? You know, like, this guy is the best Vulcan lyre player, so we all know about him, instead of this guy's okay, but he's good looking, and the record label's really pushing him, so.
Yeah. Is there marketing? Is there advertising? We know occasionally they'll mention people who are, well known. Jake wants to be a writer, so that's a job. There's a writing school.
Right.
We know that people can be writers, but if you just want to be a writer, you just publish a book? Is there a publishing industry?
Well, there is in Voyager. The Doctor wants to publish his holo
that's
novel.
Right. That's right.
And he does have, and the publisher is actually very unethical, which I thought was strange because this is the Federation, right? He's a Bolian, and he sort of he publishes the book without the Doctor's permission, and it causes this whole problem. And then he has to basically take him to court, like he sues him, and they have an arbiter. I don't know if this is how courts work in the Federation, but they have an arbiter come in and sort of rule on it. And it's all kind of a workup of Measure of a Man, just with the Doctor. But that's
right. Forced arbitration in the future? I don't think so.
All the lawyers are dead, right?
Yeah.
They killed them all. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I'd forgotten about that episode. So there's still corruption that happens. There's still room to do things in this, even in a utopia. It doesn't have to be a perfect utopia. And I think a lot of times people think of utopias in utopian dreaming. Oh, I remember what I was going to talk about. There was a moment in one of the season 2 Discovery episodes where Stamets, I think, briefly referenced the Green New Deal, not by name, but he was talking about how the Earth was facing like systemic like environmental collapse, and they did something altogether and they saved it. And I freaked out. I spilled my tea. I literally jumped up and threw everything. I was like, "What? It's happening! It's official!"
Right. Admiral Ocasio-Cortez is on the line. Yeah.
Dude, she'd make a great admiral. I'm for it. She would not make bad choices. She would only make good choices.
Yeah. Too much dancing. It's a scandal. So anyway, I mean, we've said it a couple times, but I think that socialism is what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
And of course, it's become a political buzzword recently. And it's becoming a bigger part of the conversation, I think, politically and economically. And I'm not a political theorist, but it seems like all utopian theory is pretty much trying to counteract the negative social effects of capitalism. So if we get rid of money, is that it? Is half the battle won?
It does seem like a lot of the battle is won. It's funny, there's not really a tradition of utopian capitalist novels. Atlas Shrugged might be the only one, and that's very arguable because a capitalist utopia is not for everybody. A capitalist utopia is only for some people. So Galt's Gulch is the only utopian part of this dystopian world.
Right.
So you can only really imagine a utopia if on a full utopia for everybody in collective terms, and it's hard to imagine that without doing something very dramatic to the money system. One of the many things I love about Deep Space Nine is that it finally figured out what to do with the Ferengi, and it has them as like the capitalist foils. And as much as you don't really get a sense of how the Federation works, you get a sense of how they work and how brutal it is. And it's played for laughs, which is great because it's sort of like they're relatively powerless. This is sort of a tiny little empire.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I was actually just rewatching one of my favorite episodes, the Siege episode from season 7 of Deep Space Nine. Quark has this wonderful speech in it where he says that, because it's set on this asteroid where the Federation soldiers have been there for a long time defending this feudal position against encroaching hordes of Jem'Hadar all the time, and they're going crazy, and it's very Vietnam feeling. Right. And Quark has this speech, and he says, if you take away humans' creature comforts, if you take away food and holodecks and hot showers, they become extremely brutal. They are not nice people, really. And I think he's totally 100% right.
Yeah.
And that I think that is exactly the only way we get to utopia is by having these nice things that make us not be terrible to each other, and nice things evenly distributed.
And it's interesting coming from a Ferengi. I don't know if he is just trying to spoil his nephew on being in the Federation, but does that then mean the negative side that Ferengi are okay with losing creature comforts? They're okay with not being satisfied they're more patient. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like that might explain why Rom has this labored so long under the yoke of his brother, is because maybe he feels sometimes that he's not getting what he deserves, but maybe there's a Ferengi, something about the Ferengi personality that's like, that's something will come, or my fortunes will change one day.
Yeah.
But yeah, you take a couple hot showers and some meals away from humans and look out.
Yeah. Well, and that's kind of the lie of capitalism, that you just have to sort of bear with it and work hard and everything's going to be all right. And
Yeah.
and Rom organizes a strike because it
True.
doesn't work out.
It does go too far at one point, yeah. Well, as we kind of wind down here, I was curious if you... I was trying to come up with a list, or just like a handful of episodes that really test the clayness of the feet of the Federation in terms of their utopia. And I had trouble kind of putting one together. Usually when something is seen as problematic, it's never something that's institutional. It's always like a rogue actor who is, for some reason, doing something, and they're eliminated at the end of the episode, and they're never brought up again. So I was thinking of something like Conspiracy, where the meat spiders are going to take over.
That's so gross.
Yeah, or like you said, like the AR-588. That's clearly an extreme situation. There's the episode of TNG where they find out that warp drive is like destroying the galaxy. But then they just kind of forget about that and they don't ever go back to it. And so I was wondering if you could think of any specific examples of maybe this utopia is not so great.
There's a couple. It's funny because actually thinking of Discovery, one of the arguments that they could have made that could have worked really well if they'd set it up properly. Because so now that Pike is captain, everybody's a sweetie and everybody's really sweet to each other. And I think as you said in one of your Discovery recaps that he's like the cool teacher.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, he's letting them hang out. I mean, they don't actually hang out and have fun, but they can talk back to him. They can go raring off on adventures, and he just says, good for you.
Just call me Mr. Chris. Yeah,
exactly. One of the arguments that could have been made if they'd done it properly is that Lorca who was from an alternate universe and wasn't really a Federation guy, was really domineering and really authoritarian, and that's why everybody was super scared and frightened all the time and not kind to each other. And so if the Federation is so fragile, if Federation ethos is so fragile that just one bad captain can cause that many problems, because that could have been really interesting. But again, they didn't really go there.
And when you have a supposedly beneficial military and you are very used to getting your free Cajun food at Cisco's, when suddenly one admiral wants to take over the entire planet, like in Homefront, everybody's like, okay, fine. And it's like, whoa, no, that's not fine. Wait.
That would be, and those would be the two episodes I would point to, that two-parter, because it is amazing how quickly everyone is sort of fine with military occupation of their streets. Everybody but Joseph Sisko, it seems, who's the moral conscience of the story. And it's that I love those two episodes. It's when people ask me where to start, even with Deep Space Nine, sometimes I say start with those, because there's such you need some backstory to know what's going on. But it's such a good, like, these are the stakes of the utopia, and it is fragile. It is these people aren't used to a fight. This is the boring group in the Ryza episode, in Worf's vacation episode. That's their complaint, is that the Federation is too soft and they're too easily controlled, and they're like frightened sheep who like to they just like to go to Sex Planet and have fun.
Right.
And that's not totally unfair criticism. Sex Planet isn't the problem, but that's not it's one of the problems of Utopia is people will maybe become too chill and too used to things being done for them.
Yeah.
And in times of crisis might be too easily shepherded.
Is everything okay where you are?
Yeah, I know. We're under attack. No, just Brooklyn. I know, it's like the fourth siren that's gone off. I apologize.
That's okay. Well, I'd like to believe, and maybe in a TV show where we focus on like main characters, this isn't true, but I'd like to believe that society will go forward anyway. You know what I mean? Like there's, I really love the Culture series of novels from Ian M. Banks. And in his books, there's this society called the Culture. They're very much like the Federation. And the books cover, maybe 1,000 years of time. And every book is about a particular person from that, and something's going wrong, or they've got a problem, or they're caught in some political intrigue. But the society keeps developing. And every book there's some worry that something's going to go wrong. And it just, life just goes on. Yeah. They found the right answer. It's this, socialist anarchic utopia, and it's going off like gangbusters, And so even if we don't follow those characters into the future, everything's fine still in the universe. Yeah. And I wonder, I'm fairly sure that when we see the Picard series, I think we're gonna slide into a soft dystopia. But I think, and actually, to be honest, that's probably the best way to go for storytelling. But I kind of want it just to pick it up, and he's old, and everything's even better than it's always been. Like everybody can fly, or something like that, or.
It'll be
because I want to believe that, and this isn't good for drama, but I want to believe that they have found the formula that is going to keep going into the future.
You see, the Utopia can be challenged. I don't mind them going even to a soft dystopia, though I'd hate to see poor Patrick Stewart suffer.
Yeah.
I don't mind that, but it's what is the trajectory of the broader universe? Is the universe trending up? If it goes into dystopia, why? It has to be really clearly, these are the things that went wrong. And again, this is what Discovery Season 1 didn't establish. Why were things so dark and so terrible? Why were they so willing to commit genocide? You have to tell us what is happening in this world. You have to, did people lose their showers and their meals, and was that it? But it's got to be in the storytelling for us to see it.
Picard's back. He hasn't had a shower or a meal in 2 weeks. Yeah.
Gross old man Picard. I'd watch it.
Did you want to comment at all about the Section 31 Giorgio series?
Oh God!
I mean, I think we've been dancing around it this entire episode.
So that's the thing. As I'm watching the season 2, I'm like, okay, well, this could go in a way that like Section 31 could be the heels of the show, and it's just like it is in Deep Space Nine, where they're there and they're a threat and they represent a real concern.
Yeah. And
they have their own point of view, but they're the bad guys. I think if Section 31 is going to have its own show, though, then that's not the direction we can go. And I don't need. There's so many TV shows now. There's that freaking NCIS. There's SWAT. There's Navy SEALs show. I think there's an FBI show. There's so many shows right now that argue that military operations and clandestine military operations, that the ends justify the means shit. That they argue that that's good. So there's a million of these. I don't need this in the space future, and I don't think these storylines are compatible.
Yeah.
I think it's always going to be weird. I think it's always going to be Admiral Bad Choices showing up and saying, you need to get along because we're nation building, and it makes no sense.
I think that they can pull it off if they do, if they take my advice and do what I say. And I'm not sure they will because, of course, the whole thing's being run by Alex Kurtzman, who, bless you, in your article, you call a relentless mediocrity, which, I'm on board with that. But anyway, he seems to be a better TV producer than a movie writer or a director. And I think if they can do this idea that I've got, which is show a continuity from now until when we meet Section 31 for the quote-unquote first time in DS9. And I think that what they're doing, that scene that you had a problem with and you didn't understand, I think that that's part of it, because we see that Leland, he's a black ops guy, he's cloak and dagger and all that good stuff, but he's human still. And his best friend, or the guy that he went to college with or whatever, he can say, okay, you know what, I screwed up, I went too far. He's still a human being, and at some point, and maybe Giorgio will be the catalyst for this, at some point they'll cross some line where they're not that way anymore. They can't be pulled back. They are just totally, radicalized in doing what they're doing. And then that's when they'll go to ground and they'll disappear. And then, 200 years later, they'll go, Section 31, what?
Right.
I feel like that's the trajectory. Now, I don't know if that's how it's going to turn out, but I could believe that.
That would work. And they wouldn't have their credit card badges anymore. Their black credit card badges.
Yeah, right.
The badges are I just kept imagining Garrick just faced with that spycraft, just unable to handle it. Yeah, that arc would work. What I don't want to see is the ends justify the means, and I don't want to see, as they did in the first season, they represent the antagonist aliens as being less than human, as being cannibals, as being people who are stupid and just don't understand what's going on.
Yeah.
As opposed to being a legitimate culture from their own point of view. That's what I'm worried about, is we're going to get more of that. Because this is the logic of Empire, and it's super easy to replicate it without thinking about it.
Yeah, now that Saru is leveled up, I want to see I want to see other Kelpian characters, because they're all just like that one head, with a blue shirt on. Yeah, so like to see a little more variety. Well, thanks so much for joining me today. It's been a really great discussion. Where can people find you online?
Oh, I'm writing for Current Affairs all the time, currentaffairs.org. We also have a podcast, also called Current Affairs, easy enough. Okay. I'm on Twitter as @FlutterSnipe for now. Okay. It's a long story, but why I have that name. That's really it. And
follow Lyta on Twitter. She was live tweeting her watching Discovery before, and it was interesting insights.
Yeah, I'm not watching it as it comes out exactly because my schedule's crazy, so I just want to catch up with it randomly on a random weekday night, and I'm live tweeting my feelings. I'm tweeting through it, as one should.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again.
Thank you. This was so much fun.
Thanks so much to Lyta for talking with me. You can find her on Twitter at @FlutterSnipe and find her writings at currentaffairs.org, including her article, The Dismal Frontier, which I'll leave a link to in the show notes. I'd also suggest that you check out an article from one of her colleagues, Brianna Rennick's. It's called The Regrettable Decline of Space Utopias, and it examines the same issues that Lyta and I discussed. That's also on Current Affairs, and I'll leave a link for that too. And I've got a link to a Cracked article that references that zombie and vampires thing I mentioned in the interview. Thanks again, Lyta. Hope to talk to you soon. During the interview, Lyta and I both mentioned the writings of former show guest Manu Sadia and his book Trekonomics, which is a succinct but comprehensive look at economy in the Trek future and what our society would have to change to see Trek become a reality. It's a great read with a lot of examples drawn from the various Trek series and films, and you can get it on Amazon.com by clicking the link in our show notes or by going to enterprisingindividuals.com and clicking through our Amazon banner. When you click through our banner on Enterprising Individuals and shop on Amazon, a percentage of your transaction comes back to us at no extra cost to you and helps keep the Warp Core lit here. And this counts for anything. It's not just Star Trek stuff. In fact, you can bookmark the banner, and when you click through to Amazon that way, whatever you buy, the same deal applies. It's a great way to help support the show. Anytime you shop on Amazon.com, click through the enterprisingindividuals.com banner and shop away. And maybe you're saying, Amazon is responsible for the decline of the mom-and-pop bookstore and the overall centralization of capital. To which I would say, okay, wow. It sounds like you would really enjoy Trekonomics, so just get it however you feel comfortable and unseize, if you would, my means of reproduction. Thank you very much. But I would also say, if you like what you hear on Enterprising Individuals, which is also something of a mom-and-pop business, and you want to support the show, why not head to our Patreon page at patreon.com/EISTpod. It's there that you can sign up to be a crew member for the show for a small monthly amount, and you can get access to exclusive subscriber content. Joining at our cadet tier, that's $1 a month, gives you access to our live shows, and it's a little early, but we're already lining up another live show for Convergence 2019. I can't say anything yet, but it's going to be big. You also get my DS9 rewatch recaps. I just released my recap for episodes 1, 2, and 3 of the second season of DS9. And coming soon, Bioneural Gel-Yaks, my series of Star Trek Voyager recaps. You can tell I'm pretty proud of that. All of which are yours for being a cadet for just $12 a year. Joining at the Ensign or $5 level also nets you extended interviews from show guests containing off-topic discussions and outtakes. You also get access to Stellar Commentaries, our feature where we riff on classic episodes of the original series. Plus, you get sneak peeks at what's coming up on the show, like what we're doing for our live shows this year. You also get EI stickers and a welcome letter, and we'll thank you live on air for your contribution for less than the price of a cup of coffee a day, ... We currently have a monthly goal, which, if we reach it, I'll do a Patreon Q&A episode, and we'll have a poll for a listener-selected episode that we'll cover on the show. So, get involved. Join the crew of the USS Enterprising Individuals. Just head to patreon.com/EISTpod. Anyone can join our crew, whether you're a citizen of a utopia or a dystopia or a fruitopia. Doesn't matter. All are welcome at patreon.com/EISTpod. And always the best way to support the show is to tell a friend about it. Anything you contribute to the show will be appreciated and will help keep us flying. Thanks. Our top comment on social media this week comes from Twitter user Kara, at Zandara on Twitter on our last episode of Discoverage, our Star Trek Discovery recap show that airs live at 9 p.m. on Thursday nights. You can follow us on Twitter at EISDpod or on Facebook to listen to the show. We were talking about slightly spoilery events on that night's episode of Discovery, The Sound of Thunder, and I suggested that if Kelpians lose their ganglia, they should put them under their pillows, and maybe in the morning they'd get a nickel from the Ganglia Fairy. To which Kara replied, "Ganglia Fairy," smiley face, yes. Sounds like that was a hit. Maybe it would make a good t-shirt. I'll talk to the design department about that one and see if we can come up with something. But in the meantime, you can sample some of the designs we've already created on our TeePublic store at teepublic.com/user/justenough-trope. All one word. We've got t-shirts, sweatshirts, tanks, mugs, phone cases, posters, you name it, all featuring snazzy Trek art and designs. Clothe your nakedness and support the show at the same time. Thanks to Kara for your comment. For winning top comment this week, you will receive a year's supply of Ganglia Fairy fly paper. I mean, they're cute, but they can get really bad in the summer months. And that's it for this supplemental episode of Enterprising Individuals. If you're an Apple Podcasts listener and you haven't yet, why not look us up on Apple Podcasts and make sure you're subscribed to the show. Also, write us a little review if the spirit moves you and give us a rating at the very least. We'd appreciate it. If you're not an Apple Podcasts user, you can still subscribe to the show on Google Play or Stitcher or wherever you get our show from. And if you leave positive comments and ratings and reviews on those platforms as well, we would be eternally grateful. Next week on Enterprising Individuals. Picture this. You're a captain of a prototype starship. You're minding your own business. You're on your way to watch Rosemary's Baby. Then wham! You wake up on SETI Alpha 5. Your back hurts. You've got a Vulcan bowl cut. And your first officer is making you eggs, telling you Earth blew up, and you've got time-traveling parasites in your brain. But where did the orange juice come from? Peter Byrne of Trek vs. Trek joins the show next week to talk about an episode of Star Trek Enterprise that shows us a Federation that has lost everything, and the lengths that Archer will go to get it back. It's Twilight, next time on Enterprising Individuals. And until then, I'm your Captain Caliban signing off and saying live long and prosper.